what I wanted to ask you, first of all, like, basically, to simplify, there are two ways to explain what happened in Montenegro last year. On one hand, we hear that it could be a real plot, anti-governmental plot, organized by Democratic Front, and on the other hand, we hear that it might be in the interest of Milo Djukanovic to have all this story, to battle the opponents. Yeah. Which explanation is more trustworthy? How do you see this picture, the whole picture?
Well, I have to say that really nothing is very clear about this at all, and that people in Montenegro and in Serbia are really kind of, and very informed people, are really divided completely in two about this. There is one side that think that the whole thing was a plot mounted by Milo Djukanovic to gather more votes at the middle of the election, because this happened right on election day. So the idea was, they say that this was a sort of theatre mounted by him, that people had been paid to do this. And many of the people may not even have known what they were involved with, that it was just at the top that people were paid, and that this was a plot to, as I say, get people out to vote, because essentially the election on the 16th of October was really about NATO, because Montenegro was on the point of joining NATO, but the government decided not to have a referendum on this question. So the election turned into that question, and Milo Djukanovic wanted, obviously, to sort of, to win, and one half of the people that I know, that people who talk about these things, think that this whole thing was a complete fake. On the other hand, there are people who think there was something genuine here, and they point to the fact that, okay, the people in Montenegro, some 20 people who had come from Serbia, were arrested, but perhaps more significantly, 2 Russians were arrested in Serbia, and then some days later, Nikolai Patrushev, a former senior intelligence operative, or a former senior intelligence agent from Russia, who still occupies an important post in the administration, came to Belgrade, and allegedly, we don't really know for sure, but allegedly those 2 people were taken away with him, and these are the 2 people now, in the last few days, that the Montenegrins say, well, they always said that these 2 Russians were involved, but they never said that they were doing this on behalf of the state. But now, on the 17th of February, the state prosecutor says they were working for the state, and obviously he wants them arrested, and there are Interpol warrants for their arrest. It's quite possible, of course, that the story is kind of somewhere between the two, that there was kind of some Russian involvement. That's possible. It seems a bit of a strange plot, because a lot of the people were like quite amateurish. They weren't very serious people, but it's quite possible that the Montenegrin authorities knew that something was happening, and it was just convenient to sort of arrest them and to make a show on the day of the election. So we don't really know for sure. That's what we know.
Mm-hmm. And if we go aside from this story, but generally, who are the main agents for Kremlin's influence in Montenegro? Who are these people?
Montenegro itself is really quite a divided, and historically quite a divided society. Well, certainly in the last sort of 10, 20 years. So what you have amongst people who are Orthodox, mm-hmm. So that I'm leaving out the minorities, Muslim minority, I'm leaving out Albanians. The vast majority of people are Orthodox. But then those people are divided between people who identify themselves as ethnic Montenegrins and those people who identify themselves as ethnic Serbs. So what happens is that Montenegrins always kind of perceive the sort of threat from Serbia and think, for example, we must join NATO because who knows, in the future we could be like Ukraine and Serbia might be a friend, but who knows, in the future it might attack us like Russia attacked Ukraine, and therefore we must join NATO. Serbs, on the other hand, tend to be those who were against the independence of Montenegro, and therefore also against NATO. So there is this kind of division. So Serbs will kind of automatically, because of these historical past, these political divisions, will kind of look much more towards Russia as a friend, while Montenegrins will tend to see it as possibly a threat. Then, of course, you've got quite close church links, NGOs. There are always allegations that friendly parties are paid for or supported somehow by Moscow, but those things are never proven.
Which party?
Well, for example, the Democratic Front now, but we don't know whether that's true, but this is just an accusation. And then, but most importantly, the most important kind of agents in that sense are there's news agencies like Sputnik, which are kind of widely picked up in Serbia and in Montenegro. And then you have a whole series of strange websites which glorify, in Serbian / Montenegrin, which kind of glorify Putin, glorify the Russian military, glorify Soviet heritage, glorify orthodoxy, and in some ways also promote divisions within the Balkans. So they're always addressing Albanians with derogatory names. Putin is always punching the Croats. The West is always trembling before Putin and Russia. So it's really these kind of websites and news agencies which are the biggest source of influence. I have to say also that there are traditionally between Montenegro and Russia quite sort of old links which go back 200 years. That the Montenegrins always looked to Russia as a sort of a great saviour from the Ottomans, and even during the times of when Yugoslavia's leader Tito was in conflict with the Soviet Union, there was actually amongst Montenegrins the highest level of so-called Stalinists were in Montenegro, but I think that kind of reflected a kind of older pro-Russian tradition. But anyway, Montenegro is divided on this question now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and also it's important, there is an investigation of all the story, right? Is it? These proceedings, this investigation, do people trust it or not? Because I've read that there is a very big problem for trust in Montenegrin courts, justice system. That there are problems with that.
Well, I think that's the case throughout the Balkans, that people believe that courts are, that there's political interference in courts, and that especially if it's something important, that the courts will always do what the authorities want them to do. So in this case, if you believe that there was a plot, then you'll probably believe that that the courts are fine, and if you believe that this is all a kind of big theatre that was mounted for the sake of Mr. Djukanovic and for his political expediencies, then you won't believe in justice in Montenegro.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and for the moment, the country is very close to the membership in NATO, right? And maybe in a few years also the membership in the European Union is expected. So, do you personally believe in this? This theory or this kind of view of the whole situation, the region, that now Russia tries to do anything possible to scrap this integration. I'm not speaking just exactly about the plot as such, if it happened, but
I mean, clearly Russian officials have said openly that they would regard this as a threat if Montenegro joined NATO, and the rest of the region, if what remains of the region, which is not become a member. So don't forget of the former Yugoslavia, Slovenia and Croatia are already members. Albania is a member. That leaves Bosnia, where Serbs, therefore kind of an anti-NATO bloc, will block Bosnia joining. Serbia itself, where 64% of people, according to a recent survey, regard NATO as a threat. But that's because, of course, the country was bombed in the Kosovo War in 1999, and Macedonia as well. Those are the countries which remain, well, and Kosovo as well, but that's another story. But those are the countries that remain which are not part of the EU and NATO. As you say, Montenegro is on track for joining. There's only a few more countries to ratify its treaty, and it will join very soon unless something very unexpected happens. But clearly, Russian officials have said that they their aim is this area should remain militarily neutral, and that they don't want this gravitation towards NATO to continue. But I'm not quite sure that after Montenegro, not much is likely to happen. Having said that, something else is happening. So let's look at Serbia, which is the biggest and most important of the remaining countries. 2 or 3 times a year, Serbia will do military exercises with Russian soldiers, with Russian troops, either in Serbia or in Russia, and also with troops from Belarus. And this plays very well with the electorate. There's a lot of this, it's very well publicised in the media. What most people don't know, and is not very well publicised in the media, is that Serbia does infinitely more exercises every year with NATO and with the US and with Western countries. Serbia's got a very high level of cooperation with NATO. There's a lot of cooperation. They do a lot together, and no one's pushing Serbia to join NATO. But sometimes you might think, well, it's not very important anyway, since they do a lot with NATO anyway.
So, there is a guy, his surname you mentioned, right? So he testified that he fought in Donbass on the side of pro-Russian separatists. So, what is known about his role in this plot?
Well, from what we understand, from what's been reported, there were 2 leaders, local leaders of this, or domestic leaders. There was a man called Dikic, a former Serbian policeman, who was sacked for one reason, because his brother, for connections with his brother, who was allegedly quite close to the mafia, but I don't know for sure, but that's what it was reported. And then there was Sinjelic, like Dikic, a Serbian nationalist, and he allegedly went to Crimea at the beginning, and then to fight in Donbass. That would have put him in touch with, presumably would have put him in touch with people in Russian intelligence. And the story goes that he went for meetings in Moscow to help organize this plot, that he was given 200,000 euros, and he was set up to organize the plot. So that's the Ukrainian connection, that one of the key organizers was already had good connections with Russian intelligence because he'd been fighting in Donbass.